For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
Your key to financial opportunity.
I started in 1960, state police. I'd been wanting to join, but I couldn't tell you the reason. Time for this case, when I retired from state police, I was chief police here in Fort Smith for 9 more years. 36 years in all. Yes, I was notified at 8:22. I was called. I was at home in Fort Smith. I arrived on the scene at 9:10, and we did a crime scene search. She was still there when the victim was still there when I arrived. There was 17 bullets and shells recovered. She had been shot 17 times, I believe. Well, when I arrived on the scene, the sheriff was already there. Sheriff Trillen Ball, Investigator Bobby Reeves, Deputy Sheriff Bill Grill, Deputy Sheriff Harold Davis, and Deputy Sheriff Stanley Couch. Investigator Reeves, who lived in Mulberry at the time, and still does, as far as I know, about this vehicle. Her name was Winona Harrison, and she related that they stopped to get air in the tires, and a woman driving a 1966 or 68 Chevrolet red in color with a blue door on the passenger side pulled up and stopped in front of her car. The man got out, got out of the car and backed it up to the front door of the store. It hadn't taken place when she left. Her and her boyfriend had been to Fort Smith, and they stopped there to get some air in the back tires. I think they were in a Cadillac, if I recall. I went to Colby, Kansas.
I'm going to kind of intervene here a little bit. Did y'all get any kind of a bolo or anything on?
We got a bolo.
Like a crime search or something. You said they've been involved in anything anywhere else? Or?
No, I think we got notified from this bolo we put out by the Kansas authorities that they had our suspects in jail.
Oh.
Trellin Ball was the sheriff. He and myself and 2 deputy prosecutors from Fort Smith from the judicial district flew up to Colby, Kansas in a leased airplane that belonged to my lieutenant's son, and we interviewed both of them up there. Well, I already knew that they weren't the kind of people I wanted to deal with. Kansas Bureau of Investigation had already interviewed them, and of course they blamed it on someone else that we couldn't put there at our place. The only 2 that was seen there was Rametta. Well, they were blaming everyone but themselves. They blamed it on Mark Walter. We could never place him in this area. The witnesses that we had only saw the 2 people, Rametta in the vehicle, and they were still there when they left, still at the murder scene. They got into a shootout with the Kansas authorities, and one of them, that Mark Walter, got shot and killed in the shootout with the police. They both had been shot. He got shot in the butt, supposedly by this dude that was traveling with him, been shot and wounded, but he was out of the hospital when we talked to him. He wasn't arrogant or remorseful either, because he didn't do it, he said. Well, I don't think she was smart enough to lie to us. Well, she wasn't smart enough to convince me of anything. She didn't remember anything gained enough to get them arrested and bring them back to Arkansas. They had them under a $5 million bond. Of course, they didn't make it, so I was at the trial. They didn't testify. He was found guilty. Well, they both were found guilty. He was found guilty of capital murder, and I believe she was found guilty of assisting. He got the death penalty, and I think she got life. I felt like she was somewhat of a victim because she was crazy about this old boy. They come to Arkansas for the trial. We got him. If I recall, it was pretty quick, but now it's been 40 years ago. You know, I didn't really have any contact with the Mulberry community after this, but I think they were real appreciative of the fact that these two had been arrested and convicted. Well, this wasn't the first tragic case I'd worked. Sure, I had feelings about it, but it wasn't like it was my first time to. I had one in Van Buren I considered worse because it was a father and daughter, and he was handicapped, and the two suspects, him and her both in the head.
Might be one you want to look into as well. The Staten murders, Staton, is the Staten Jewelry Store in Van Buren, Arkansas. There is actually a book out on it, written by Anita Paddock called Closing Time.
Yeah, I have insight. They robbed it, and they didn't want to leave witness.
Yeah, this little store, it's no longer in business anymore. It's been several things since then. It's just right off the interstate. And I think probably they thought it was a small store. There wasn't a whole lot of business there, and they saw their opportunity to make some quick cash and not leave a witness, basically the way it sounds to me. Small community, and everybody knew one another down there, and I imagine they probably still do. It's still a very small community. Well, Dad was telling me about, I guess, the people that owned the store also owned the motel there, and they heard some scratching or something on the intercom.
That's the way they communicated.
Okay.
They lived right there by it. And if Linda needed any help, she'd scratch on that speaker, and they would come down, and they did that night. Yeah, and she didn't do that, but it's what it sounded like when there was gunshots going on. Well, it wasn't scratches. It sounded like scratches. It sounded like the way they communicated it.
It was the gunshots. It's what they were hearing.
Well, it's a very, very small town. I'm talking no street lights. We have stop signs, pretty much just one restaurant. My entire life growing up there, it's called the Dairy Dip. Not a lot to do, but I would say probably a very close-knit community just because it's so small. Like my graduating class, I graduated in a class of 20 people. Very, very small. Everybody's families kind of know each other. I walked everywhere, as a kid because everything was in walkable distance. It definitely has pretty areas and then, more rundown small town areas. I know she was very important to the community. She was very heavily involved in the church. Really, everyone knew her as someone that helped. I mean, it was, if someone needed help with anything, she was there. I know she was going to school to be able to get I think it might have been an associate, I can't remember, some type of certification or degree to do special education classes at the high school, but she never got to finish that. But I know she was in school at the time that she died to be able to do that. She was just working, as a clerk at the little gas station. I know, growing up in the home, she was kind of strict. My mom told me a funny story how she would always, try to be on a diet, and so she had all those, healthy, foods and stuff in the house, and my mom would try to eat them, the little TV dinners that are supposed to be, healthy choice and stuff. And she would be like, that's my health food. You eat regular food. I was going to say, this is really interesting. She actually had a near-death experience when my mom and her siblings were kids. It was, from what I understand from my mom telling me about it, she was doing laundry and their dryer blew up. She had like 3rd-degree burns on her entire body. My mom said that she remembered her dad running into the house, which is my grandpa, and he said, get your mom water, and she didn't know what he was talking about, and she kind of came outside with a glass of water, you know, not understanding, and she said that she saw her mom just standing out in the yard, you know, covered in burns, and it was very, very disturbing, and they had to, you know, rush her to the hospital in Fort Smith because Mulberry's so small. Fort Smith is where I live now. It's about 45 minutes away from Mulberry, and I remember she told me at the time it wasn't normal to have like your kids come to the hospital. Like kids weren't really supposed to be in the hospital, but they said that they didn't think she would live if she didn't get to see them. And so my mom remembers them like bringing in her and her siblings to see her, and she ended up making it through. My mom was 21. She had just moved out and gotten a full-time job in a warehouse. Her siblings were still living at home. She definitely moved out of the house. She might have moved to Fort Smith because that's really the only place to get jobs, and usually where people from Mulberry end up going just to stay close to home but be able to, you know, have an apartment and a job. I know she was at work when she found out, and her supervisor had called her to the office, and her dad was there, and he just said, like, you know, mom's gone home, she's gone, you know. And I do remember my mom saying that he said the same thing to her younger siblings, and my Aunt Jen, which is her little sister, she was the youngest, she was 10 at the time, she didn't understand what that meant. Like, she thought, like, mom's at home. Like, she didn't know, you know. So after, I believe, all the trial and everything, it might have been during, but I know a majority of them writing back and forth was after he was sentenced and he was already in prison. And they wrote letters back and forth. It was really, she said a lot of what he said, he couldn't, like, you know, admit to anything. But it was all about forgiveness and, like, you know, regret and being sorry, even though he couldn't say what he was sorry for. That would be like admitting to the crime. I think that had to do a lot with her faith. They all went to the Baptist church. Like, my grandma Linda was very involved in the church, and they were raised that way, and, you know, on forgiveness. That was a very big aspect of their lives. I know my uncle did not agree with that, even though he was also a Christian and in general believed in that, but he just couldn't at the time forgive, obviously. I wouldn't say my mom necessarily forgave him, but my mom, she kind of took it as an opportunity to witness her religion to him. So it felt more to her, she wasn't trying to connect with him for herself, really. It was more like she thought maybe she could help him be a better person. I know another aunt that I don't know very well, and she's passed by now. I know she was the one who started the pamphlet, and they actually started like a whole thing in the prison with prison ministry about, like, don't do drugs, and they made all these pamphlets, and he was heavily involved in that, so they worked together to try to better prisons. It's very interesting. That's where, like, that artwork came from, the little pamphlets with the, like, drugs kill you and Jesus saves and things like that. That was his pamphlets that he made. Like, he drew all that artwork, and he wrote that poem called Voices, just about feeling like he has voices telling him what to do. Growing up, a lot of people my age obviously didn't know about it because we were born after everything happened. But, you know, older people would know, like, who I was talking about if I said Linda Marvin. And then it was more so, I would tell people about it and they would be interested in the case, but most people had not heard of it around my age. Pretty much everyone in the generation above mine remembers it very vividly. So a lot of the people that were around her age or my mom's age knew all about it, remembered it vividly, but my generation kind of became the next one after that didn't know about it. I know sometimes the building is still there. I know sometimes they open it up during like 4th of July, and they'll sell like fireworks out of it, but it's not like a normal business that's open all the time. It's just like a building that the city uses sometimes now. I do remember, this is kind of silly and it's small, but I do remember, this was so crazy. I had a friend that I met in 5th grade, and I was actually also best friends with his sister, and so it was the three of us, spending time together. And we always loved, spooky things and going to haunted places and stuff. Well, one day he told me that he was working that fireworks stand and he thought he heard a door slam inside, and so he Googled it, and apparently, I guess because she's the only murder that's ever happened in Mulberry, people, make up ghost stories about stuff like that. And he was telling me about this ghost story, and I was listening, and I don't remember exactly how old we were, but we were very young. And I said, "That's my grandma you're talking about." I realized, that was so funny that it's supposed to be one of the only ghost stories from Mulberry, just because it's the only weird death. First time I think anyone my age ever mentioned it to me, but they obviously didn't know that I was related to her or knew about it. I mean, my uncle is definitely very well known in Mulberry. He has been the fire chief, the chief of police. He was mayor for years. I mean, he is very, very involved in the community. So everyone knows, Jeff Marvin and Mulberry. I went on vacation a couple months ago, and we were all the way up in Montana and Wyoming, and we ran into some people from Arkansas, and they actually knew of Mulberry and knew people from Mulberry. And it's just common to be like, Jeff Marvin, and everyone does, and of course they did. So that was really wild to run into people that far away, and they know Jeff Marvin from Mulberry. Yeah, just very small, close-knit, you kind of went to school from kindergarten to senior year with the same people, so everyone knows each other, I know the gas station's on 64. There's two main streets in Mulberry, and it's Main Street and Church Street, if that tells you anything about, and then 64 cutting right through it, so. My mom said that when she died, it was like a pillar of the community died. Everyone was rattled, specifically because there had never been any type of crime that serious in Mulberry. And it was also scary because, being a close-knit type community, this was an outsider who came to Mulberry and killed a citizen. So there was a lot of fear at the time, I know, of, that could happen to anybody here. We're not as safe as we think, especially Linda Marvin of all people. So kind of the feeling of the town, and I know it still resonates with a lot of the people that were there at the time.
Well, we were home. I was home. My little sister Jennifer was home. My dad. Just things there's some things that stick out about the night. My mom, before she left, I had kissed her on the cheek, and she kind of like it was sour or whatever, and told her bye. And but she said, "Hey, if you get a chance, will you wash my coat for me?" While I'm at work. And the reason I'm telling you this because there's something I never got to tell her is I would put it in the washing machine, and I forgot, and I went and got in the shower, and the washing machine kicked on, so the shower got cold. And I remember thinking, I'm going to tell her I washed her coat, but I had to take a cold shower, because a lot of times the washing machine would take the hot water. So I never got to tell her that, of course. About 8:30 that night, some folks from church come knocking on the door, and they weren't regular, the house, so I knew something was kind of odd, and they just told my dad there's been an accident at the store, and he needed to come out there. So he left, and I took my sister, and we went to my grandmother and aunt's house. Just told them that something had happened. Of course, we were both upset because we didn't know what had happened, but something was going on. I remember, as far as being like forever, it probably wasn't, but about 30 minutes or so, my dad come in, and said something to the effect of, your mother's in heaven, or something to that effect. And, just the emotions of the whole thing going on. Some of my friends had come over, and of course, my parents were well known in So there was just dozens and dozens of people from not even Mulberry, from other surrounding towns showed up down there that night. Of course, everybody wanted to talk to you, and I really didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to kind of be left alone. But anyway, my dad left to go tell Melanie because she was at work, and we stayed there and waited on him to get back. Then I went home with him, and I remember that night that I don't know if I'd ever seen my dad cry or not, but I can remember that night we went home and he sat down, head in his hands, and said, half of me is gone. And he said, you'll understand that one of these days. You get married. And I remember going to bed that night, and when I woke up the next morning, just like a normal morning, and for just a few seconds, I woke up and everything was fine, and then realization of what had happened, come back, and I had to, of course, deal with that. But that's as far as that night. The next morning, that's pretty much my memory of what went on. We found a lot of other stuff out down the road, as the sheriff contacted my dad, things like that. I mean, I don't remember the exact day, of course, but I think Sheriff Ball called my dad and said, we got a couple people, I think they were in custody, but I don't remember what state they were in, maybe Texas. They were in so many different states that I don't recall all of that. They got in a shootout, and one had got killed, and I think Sheriff Ball called my dad and said that they had two in custody that they thought were likely suspects, in my mom's murder. I remember that the 22 casings that were left at the crime scene where my mother was murdered, I remember that I don't remember if he told my dad or if it come out in the newspaper, but that they matched the gun that they had, one of the guns they had found on them, and maybe some casings from another crime. But as far as how I felt, I mean, I don't know. You're so shocked, and of course there is some relief that whoever did it is hopefully caught. I've never been a huge proponent of the death penalty, but the prosecutor at some point said they were going to seek the death penalty. As a kid, I didn't mind it, I guess, but my biggest thing was, as far as my concern was, that he not be able to do that again, so whether he was in the penitentiary or whether he'd been put to death, just knowing that he was locked up and wasn't going to be able to harm anybody else, that decided me to, I guess, as much extent as possible. But I do remember hearing Rometta and Lisa Dunn for the names. The other guy's name was Michael something, I believe. Mark Walt. He was the one who killed in the shootout. And but we heard the names, and so those names, the two that they arrested stick in your head. And it's been 38 years. So, you do lose some memory, and the family kind of has depended on me because I've always had a super good memory, but the last few years it seems like I've struggled keeping up with all of it. Part of that is I think you just slowly put things out of your head, so don't deal with it. I'm not going to say I'm super detailed, but I remember details, things that are just crazy to even remember, numbers and things, and usually have an answer if somebody will ask a question. But I realized since my dad passed, I guess it's been almost 3 years ago, that I wish I had asked him a few more questions. But I never really wanted to dive deep into it. I just remembered what I heard, was told, things like that. I didn't ponder on it a lot. It's obviously on your mind, but my sister was little, and I think I was probably more concerned about her than me. I was almost 16 years old, and I was obviously going to remember my mother because of all the years we'd had, and I always was concerned whether or not Jennifer would remember as well, because she was, I think, 9 or 10, and she doesn't remember as much, of course, being smaller. when we were kids, if you didn't do what you're supposed to do, you got your tail busted, and she busted my tail more than one time. I mean, she wasn't a dainty lady. She's kind of like my sister Jennifer. She wasn't big, but she was strong, you know, and she'd bust your tail if you got out of line. But we got along real well. We just did. I was never, I don't know, I never got to the point as a teenager that I thought my parents were stupid. I just didn't. My dad used to tell me, you're a 10-year-old in a 40-year-old in a 10-year-old body. Did you think about things and worry about things and consider things that children shouldn't even have to be concerned about? But I always was that way. But we got along great. Like I said, I kissed her that night on the cheek before she left, and she's like acting like, you know, like I said, like it was sour or whatever, like, oh, what are you doing, you know? And yeah, we went places together, and I, you know, sometimes go grocery store with her and just different things like that. I think the reason we were closest is I didn't give her much grief. Melanie sometimes could, you know, teenage girl and a mom, there's just going to be differences. But yeah, we were pretty close, very close. I went to the trial, I don't remember if it was 86 or 87. I think it was 86 when we actually went to trial, and I might be off on that a little bit. Yeah, I went to the trial. I remember seeing Rametta and thinking that he just looked evil, you know. It's almost like like when he peered at you or looked back, like he's looking through you, you know. And I remember thinking that this seemed like evil to me. And of course, we sat through the trial, and one thing I remember is when the lady from Texas, I believe, had been shot with the .357 5 times. She identified him in court, and the defense attorney said, well, how can you be sure? Because the report you give the night you were shot said he was taller than this, and he was trying to find some discrepancies, you know, and what she said. And this lady stood up in court and started pulling her blouse off, and she said, I'll show you the gunshot holes. And the judge said, no, that'll be enough. And he told the defense attorney there'd be no more questioning about that. She's made a positive identification, and the court was satisfied with it. But I know she came up from Texas to testify, so we all always appreciated that she was willing to do that, you know. At the end of the trial, and I don't remember doing this, but when they sentenced him, I must have took my hand and made a X across my throat, you know, like you're done or whatever. And I don't even recall doing it, but the Southwest Times paper apparently was watching me, and they printed that, you know, the next morning. And when I went to school the next morning, there were some of the guys were that said something about it, and I'm trying to think, and when they mentioned it, I thought I did do that, but how did they know? I said, how'd you know that? And he said, well, it's in the newspaper. But anyway, we talked to some of the witnesses, but there was so much going on in the courtroom and outside the courtroom that I can't be positive of who we did and didn't. I think, I don't remember if my dad spoke to Lisa Dunn's parents. They come, I believe they come to that trial. I know they come when she was there. But I think some of the family might have spoke to them because they were apologizing and saying that they had not raised her that way, and that they were sorry that, family gone through what they did. Honestly, my impression was that she was a liar. It seemed like she got convicted somewhere else, and I can't remember. I'll get this mixed up, but she was convicted somewhere else and had done some time, and they were bringing her back for a plea agreement or something. And Ron Fields contacted us, and we all went and met with him in the courthouse. And he said, I don't think I can get the same conviction on her due to certain circumstances, and she's probably not going to do any more time because she's already done time in another state. And I think the judge would run it concurrent. And he said if you want me to prosecute it, I will, but do y'all want to go through that again? And my dad, he had kind of asked us, and I said, not particularly. I just didn't put it behind me, and so they decided to just do a plea agreement, I believe is what happened, and she maybe had some suspended sentence or something. But I don't remember if I saw an interview with her or if it was actually in court. I just remember thinking that what she was answering, it was like everything she said was a convenient answer, and she was claiming that she had nothing to do with it, that she was a battered woman, but, they proved otherwise in some other states that she was complicit in this, and I think she went back to Traverse City maybe or somewhere in that area, and then somebody sent us an article years ago where she got in some more trouble up there. We felt like she was part of it, but I don't know that for a fact. I wasn't there, and I don't know what her situation was, but I don't ponder on her, think about her, just be honest, I didn't care what he was doing in prison. I didn't care what he had to say. And if a dog bites you, you don't want to go pet it again. That's just stupidity. That dog bit me 3 times. I believe I'll go pet it again. And I just was not interested. I don't have any hard feelings against Melanie, but I was not interested in it and didn't really want to know anything that happened about it. I had dealt with it myself and was moving on, and my dad talked to us a lot, even that first day or two, and said, you can't let this define your life, and you can't hold hate in your heart. It'll eat at you instead of if you hate somebody, then you may think it hurts them, but it's just going to eat at you, basically. So, I'm not going to let this event, it's not going to define my life. Sure, there's things about it that have affected my life, obviously, and I think that's why I'm probably more compassionate than some men are when I see people that have lost, I was grown. Was that in 97? I had ran for county coroner. I was in office, and somebody called the coroner's office and said they wanted to talk to me, wanted to know if we wanted to be present, I think. And I said, no, I don't want to be present. I have nothing. I've lost nothing down there, and so I'm not going. And then the newspaper called that night and just asked for a reaction, wanted to know if I would make a statement, and I think I said something to the effect of that whether, what I told you earlier, whether he was locked up or whether he was put to death, as long as he couldn't harm anyone else, I was satisfied. I don't oppose necessarily the death penalty, but I think it's got to be a very, very egregious case, and this was. But I think sometimes it's used when it shouldn't be. That's just my opinion. Human life is so sacred that you have to be cautious about maybe getting a prosecutor somewhere that's overzealous. And, we've seen articles and stuff on TV where people have been on death row and found out that DNA cleared them. And so you can't take that back, I remember some little details that really are kind of probably insignificant. Most of the time I know the coroner transports a body at a crime scene, but the sheriff had actually called the state crime lab and had them come out directly to the scene. So they were out there till about midnight, I think, and when the medical examiner showed up and transported her to Little Rock for an autopsy. I remember that. There was a couple of guys that were kind of regulars out at the store that for some reason just didn't stop that night, and I know a couple of them told my dad that they wished they had stopped, and I remember him saying, well, I appreciate what you're saying, but you might have been a victim too if you'd stopped, and so maybe it just worked out the way it should have. Not that we wanted to lose our mother, but it could have been, if there had been other people in there, I'm sure they would have all been murdered also.
I was 20 years old, and I had been working at Whirlpool since I graduated from high school in Fort Smith, and I worked the second shift. So I was at work, and it was, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and my boss came and got me off the line and said we need to go to the office, which was very unusual for me because I never got in trouble. I was always straight A, do everything right student, that type of person, and employee. So I knew something was going on, but had no idea what. And we walked to the office, and they took me in a room, and my dad and his pastor at the church that I attended growing up were standing there. Now, I'll tell you this, and people can be skeptical if they want to, but if it has to do with being a Christian or it has to do with instinct. But as soon as I saw my daddy's face, I knew that my mama was gone. I knew there had not been an accident. We've been through enough tragedies in our family that I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew mama was gone. I knew it wasn't one of the kids. And then he just looked up at me and he said, "Baby, mama's gone home." And I said, "Well, give me just a little bit of time and I'll be home." And he and the pastor both were like, "Oh, well, you can let us come by and get you." I lived in Fort Smith in an apartment by myself at the time. And I said, "No, I'm okay. I'll be down there, because I knew my brother and sister were at my grandmother and aunt. My grandmother and my aunt was Mama and Nanny, and they were Mama and Nanny, not just to our family, but to practically the whole town. So that's where the kids were, and that's where I wanted to get to, where they were too. And so he said, okay. I mean, I was a lot like my dad in personality, so he knew that I was okay, enough to get myself together and drive myself to Mulberry from Fort Smith. I wasn't freaking out or anything. So at that point, we knew what had happened at the store for, as far as there's been a shooting, Mama is gone, and we have no idea who did it. That, to me, that was part of the hard part in the beginning. It wasn't that Mama was gone, because as a Christian and growing up believing the way that we did, I wasn't worried about my mama. At that point, I think I was concerned with, and I think, the adults in the family were, we don't know who did this, but we sure hope it wasn't someone we know from Mulberry. We just hoped it wasn't a local and someone that we knew, which it turned out not to be, but that was kind of my initial, what happened around me. It's just been so long. I mean, we just 2 weeks ago had my class reunion, and I've been out of high school 40 years. Yes. When I was a teenager, junior high age and teenager, I remember getting mad at Mama. We fought like normal parents, probably more. Being the oldest child and the daughter, me and Mama argued and fought, but we also had a relationship where everything I know now about cooking and sewing and that type of thing came from her, So I remember getting mad at her because she wouldn't stay there or be there and do something that I wanted her to do with me. I don't even remember what at this point. But looking back on it, it was because she was doing something with other people's children who didn't have parents like mine. She was working in the church or working through the school outreach. She drove the church van to pick up kids and would go out every Saturday morning and give them a piece of gum and invite them to come to church, adults and children alike. And she was always involved in something that was an outreach ministry. And even at school, she got a job as an assistant to what at that time was called the TMR, or Trainable Mentally Retarded class at school. I mean, I think it's called something else now. She just loved being of service. I'll tell you something that I found out at my class reunion that I didn't even realize, because you have people come back and tell you so many things that you didn't even realize or know about your own parent, because they were out in the public helping other people. And I mean, she was the type, there was always food on the table and, and always a home environment. We had a good home environment, a good Christian home, good background. And my mom rode the church bus when she was a kid because her parents didn't go to church. And I think maybe it stemmed from there, of her being, she just had a servant's heart. as far as her outreach outside the home. And at my class reunion, we had a girl that was in my class that she didn't end up graduating our senior year, but she went to school with us for a lot of years, and her mother passed away when we were 9 years old. And of course, I remember what it felt like to me as a 9-year-old, but I had no idea what else was going on. And she told us at the reunion how much she appreciated our class and some of our class parents, because there were some of the mothers, and mine was one, who would come over and check on her or bring cookies over to the house for her and her dad after her mother passed and things like that. So Mama was always looking for a way to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, and she was just always helpful to everybody at school. She was just real involved in the church and the school both. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mama's funeral was the first time that our school had ever closed for a funeral. And the school is right next to the Baptist church where my family attended. They share a parking lot, and it was so full that there were people standing out all the way into the parking lot because they couldn't get in the church. I do remember that. Yeah, it had a huge impact on the community. Everybody in the community knew her, knew our family. And so everybody had a different thought or feeling about it, and depending on their relationship with Mama or just any of us in the family, because at the time I was 20, my brother was 15, and my sister was 10. So we had me just graduated, one in high school, one in elementary school, plus we had been involved in the Baptist church, since I had been about 3 years old. So, yeah, I remember people around town, I always had the attitude of, we're Christians, we know the end result and the outcome, and Daddy just presented a strong front to us of, we're going to be Christians about this situation as well, because it's just one more thing that you have to face. And he took us out to the store the next day. All three of us kids and Daddy went out to the store that it happened in. He wanted us to not be afraid to go in the store after that point or to have any hesitation about it. And as far as I know, now I don't know about my brother and sister. We talk about a lot of things, but some of the details I forget. One of them has never been back in that store after that, but I don't remember which one. But I've been in it many times. Even at the store, the family that owned the store was a family from our church. That's why Mama was working out there part-time. She was going to college at C of O in Clarksville because she wanted to be able to be the actual teacher instead of an assistant with the disabled children. And after the fact, throughout the years, I've had people that felt like it was okay to talk about it then, to me, tell me things about what they, how they felt and what they thought and where they were, and that they'll never forget this or that. And actually, one of the girls that was a witness to seeing the car pull away from the store was a girl that went to school with me that was just a class below me. So, the whole community was involved in one way or the other, whether they just knew us or, I played all the sports, so I was involved in all the sports activities at the school. I worked at the little Mulberry Dairy Dip from 10th grade till I was a senior and when I could, so I was involved down there, knew all those people. Mulberry's just a small, close-knit community in a time of tragedy and does what's necessary. And we just buck up and handle it and move on. There's been some tragedy in Mulberry with a few different things, but there had never been anything of this magnitude that would be considered a spree killing or whatever, however you want to classify it. Never had been anything of that magnitude in the town in our generation for us to remember, that was that big of a thing at that time. Yeah, that was something that I think the whole town and even the whole county experienced, because my relatives, my grandma and grandpa, my mother's parents and her sister, and she had brothers still alive at the time and sisters, and they, for the most part, lived in Crawford County or over in Sebastian into Fort Smith. So between Mulberry, Alma, Van Buren, and Fort Smith, Mama's extended family all lives in the area. So yeah, we're pretty close in that respect, where we've moved away to and that sort of thing. The Marvins, as far as my daddy and our family, have pretty much stayed in Mulberry, and Mama's family pretty much have stayed in the Alma, Van Buren area, some in Fort Smith. You know, a lot of these memories fade so much after so much time. I was involved pretty much in everything that I could be at that point. As far as I'm a detail person. I don't want the headline. I want all the details, and I want to know everything. So I remember when they told us, you know, that the suspect was Daniel Rometta and everyone that was involved with that whole situation in the car and all. And I think to all of us, even though the tragedy didn't go away, it was a sigh of relief that it was a stranger. We were just so hoping it was not someone we knew in Mulberry that was having a hard time and needed money, you know, because I could name 10 people without hesitation that would have given them money if that was the situation. And I think we were real thankful that it wasn't someone, or I was personally, that it wasn't someone I knew. You know, we didn't know anything about him or what went on in the beginning. We just knew that my aunt, my mother's sister, Brenda, was in more close contact with our county sheriff at the time, Trellin Ball, because they went to church together in Alma. I don't remember how long after the fact it was. You know, your initial feelings are, even though you're a Christian, your initial feelings and thought, when I found out, is even if you don't want to hate a person, you're immediately harboring anger. You know, I think I was just more curious, though, of the whys. What were you doing and why? And why were you in that situation? That's what I thought about Daniel. At a certain point later on, it was probably, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years later, I actually made contact through letter with Daniel Rometta. So that's a whole nother story in it from my Christian perspective, you know, but initially you know that the right thought and the right feeling is to not be full of hate, not want revenge and all of that as a Christian, but you can't help but be angry and mad and upset, you know, but the Bible says to be angry and sin not. So even though we were angry, we chose not to take revenge, broadcast hateful, hurtful things to where other people would see that as an example, because that's not the example we wanted to put out there, you know. Just the Holy Spirit just convicting me of what I felt like through God's Word, reading the Bible, what God wanted me to do. And I read across the Bible verse. I did my best at that point, try to do what I thought the Bible said I was supposed to do, you know. Limited understanding I had as a 20-year-old. And so I read across the verse that said to love your enemies. And at that point I felt like Daniel was my enemy. I really felt like he was one of my enemies because he had just stolen something from me. And do good to those that persecute you. And that's talking about persecuting you for the sake of Christ. But, you know, I felt like that was an attack of the enemy. I felt like Satan had done his job of to come in to kill, steal, and destroy. And that's what he tried to do. But he did not kill, steal, or destroy our faith in God through the situation. I had one of my close friends say, Melanie, how can you, after God let this happen to you, how can you still believe in God? And my answer is, if it wasn't for the grace of God, none of us would be able to go through a tragedy like that and come out on the other side as well as we all have, and with the mindset and the heart set that we have. We attribute that to our relationship with God, for sure. So, anyway, I felt like I went several months. I thought, I knew how my immediate family would feel. My sister was too young. My brother was too, but I didn't want to hurt him. I felt protective of his heart, and I certainly didn't want to hurt Daddy, and I knew how my dad felt. My dad was, at that point, I don't know if it was just anger or pain or how he felt, even as a Christian. He believed, like I do, that what you reap you sow, and if you do something good or you do something bad, you're going to get the result of that. You know, some people call it karma, but I believe the Bible teaches it's sowing a seed, and that seed grows. Even if you repent of your sin, you still have to walk the consequences out of something that you've done, the seed that you've sown. So Daddy was more, I think, he just didn't want to hear about it, you know. He wasn't opposed to anything that I did, as far as I know, but he didn't want involved. He didn't want to hear about it. He had made his peace with God over the situation and felt like Daniel was right where he belonged. And so, which I did too. Even as a Christian, I believed that. but I just had a compelling feeling I could not get away from of this person needs at least one chance in his life to hear the gospel. And what if nobody else has presented it to him at any other time? I had no idea, but I just kept feeling like I needed to do that. Well, I wrestled and wrestled with it, and so then probably after a few months, I called my Aunt Brenda, and I said, Aunt Brenda, you're going to think I'm crazy, and I tell her what I was thinking, and she just started bawling. And she said, because I was calling her because I said, I need to get his address where he's in prison, and I probably need to do it through the prosecuting attorney, blah, blah, blah. And she said, finally, after she quit crying, she said, I've got it. And she had felt the same feeling that I had as far as God working on her heart to be a witness to Daniel. And she had actually already written, I believe, and I'll tell you something that she did. Well, me and her, we called her the Bible lady, snuck a Bible in through Trellin Ball, the sheriff, when he was here in county jail, and gave him a Bible from our family, presented it to him as from our family as a whole. And nobody knew that at the time. She just did it. And so she got me the address, and I did start writing to him strictly as witnessing to him. But we wrote over the course of, I'm going to say, about a year, and I never allowed him to get off into anything personal like that, what was going on in my life at the time, or anything with my family, that type of thing. It was Bible or his issues. You know, if he was doing, he liked to draw, he liked to write some poetry of what he thought was poetry. And, you know, that type of thing. So it was surface level other than his soul issues as far as I was concerned. It's all I wrote with him about. But I did do that. I'll tell you this. I know through all the trial, because I went to every second of every hearing and every trial that was here in Crawford County with him and Lisa Dunn when she eventually came down here too. But with him during the trial, which was 2 years after the fact. So it was longer before I wrote to him because it was after the trial. Yeah. During the trial, I sat in the front row and I made him see me. You know, I mean, I didn't do anything flamboyant, but I made him make eye contact with me because I didn't allow him to be able to look away from us. The trial was before I had ever written to him, but ever witnessed to him. And during some of that time when he was in Crawford County, I believe it's when my Aunt Brenda gave him the Bible. But anyway, so I went through the whole trial, heard everything that came out about him, you know, and all that sort of thing, and then wrote him. And basically the first letter I wrote him was I wrote a poem to him, and I basically just presented to him that no matter what he had done, there was still mercy with God, and God could forgive even murder. It may not get him out of where he's at, but he could have a relationship with God. And he did respond. I never asked him had he actually been the one to pull the trigger, that type of thing. He never came right out and said it. But he did ask for my forgiveness at a certain point, and I truly believe that I forgave him. I would have gone to the execution, except that I had been a long time waiting on having a baby, and I was about halfway through my pregnancy, and I really didn't know. I was afraid of it having any traumatic effect on me, so, you know, while I was pregnant. Otherwise, I would have gone to that as well. I would have liked to have seen him in person and been able to talk to him one last time, because I only wrote to him for that short period of time, probably about a year, but my Aunt Brenda had a longer relationship with him, trying to help him get some of his drawings and poems like printed where they could be used in prison ministry and given out to other people and that type of thing. But he wavered. You know, he would go back and forth, up and down, back and forth. 1 minute, yes, he wanted forgiveness and he professed to be a Christian. And then 6 months later, it would be like someone would make him mad and not do what he wanted them to do. A person that was helping him through prison to do something like print these materials or whatever. Then he would renounce God and he's having no part of it. So I I really don't know the change in his heart, but I have to feel like through what we corresponded and a few things that he said, how the girl at the trial, I knew I made eye contact with her. I didn't understand what God was doing at the time even. To me, I thought it was because I was mad at him. I had anger. But to him, he felt like he saw the soul of someone, of what his consequences had caused. He was actually seeing the pain of what he had done in someone, is the way he expressed to me. And so I think he did feel remorse. And I think at one time he did, try, maybe ask God to forgive him and try to go that route. But I can't tell you how it was when he passed away, because I really don't know. And just trust that, the Bible says to plant the seed, somebody else will water, and God's the one that brings the harvest. So I have to trust that God and the Holy Spirit dealt with him how he needed to be dealt with, because I don't know in the end. To me, he would just be another person in line in heaven, if he was there, that would go up to my mom and say, I'm here because of you. Because there's so many people in this town, children that are now adults older than me, I think, that would have to say the same thing. You picked me up on the church bus every Sunday morning and got me there when my parents never went. Or, you brought me a piece of gum and told me Jesus loved me, and I didn't even know that at the time. That was my mom. Where I got the feeling of why he was in the position he was more so of, I think, from the trial when the defense presented his background, the home life he came from, and all of the things that went on. He had no guidance whatsoever spiritually. He was in a very neglectful, he was in a home that he should have been pulled out of and raised somewhere else. I don't know what the welfare system and all that was like in Michigan at the time, but they told testimony of where the DHS workers had gone in. It was the cold winter in Michigan. Windows were broken out. There was no food in the house. I remember them talking about where his uncles would pit him and his brothers against each other like pit bulls, and they'd have to fist fight till one of them went to the hospital. Terrible things as growing up. No comfort, no guidance, no anything. And I think as a Christian, we have to be compassionate toward people that are in those situations, even if we don't meet them until they've already committed a crime. Your heart goes out to the little boy that's inside of that man. He's still a spiritual little boy, a little boy, because he knew nothing. And he really needed reached out to, I think, way, way, way before he ever committed crimes. At that point, I was not writing to him, but I know my Aunt Brenda was still in contact with him, and I know that both of us had completely presented the gospel to him in a way that he could have had peace at the end. I think that just depended on what condition he was in, spiritually speaking, in the 98, I think is when that was. And he had a lot of years and a lot of time to ponder everything, the things he did and the things he didn't do. And he had enough of a present a way for him to have peace that at that point it was on him. I really don't know. Trust me, I feel like I hammered in enough to him that he could have grasped back on a hold of that, even if he had some fear and was scared, which I think any human being at the moment of death, we are afraid of the unknown. As a Christian, we don't have to have that fear. My opinion is, as a Christian, we ought to be excited and ready to move on to what's next. But I don't know. I really didn't know at that point, exactly how. I knew there was some stuff going on, like I think he had either a girlfriend or gotten married or something in prison at that point, and I really didn't have anything to do with any of that. I didn't have anything to do with his personal life. I went to the trials. I met, when her parents came, I think we met her parents, and I'll tell you the truth. This is a flaw in a human being that you just really have to reach out to God, to the Bible to get through, because I had more compassion, I'll just tell you, for Daniel than I did for Lisa, because of the fact of where he came from and the background that she came from. She had a good family, a good home, got mixed up in things she didn't need to get mixed up in, and it wasn't that I couldn't forgive forgive her also. It was that I think my compassion and sympathy for where she came from, it kind of kicked into that, you should have known better a little bit more, you know. And also, I think a lot of things, I know it's difficult for people to get out of a lifestyle of being in a prison situation and trying to come back and do better, but she continued to mess up after she had more chances, and I didn't appreciate that. That's only from me reading media, I'll say that. As far as I could tell, he was always on something, but I think probably drugs, but alcohol too. And I'll tell you, as far as the drugs go, he had no hesitation with letting me know that even on death row, that was still available to him to fall into that lifestyle, because he did struggle going back and forth, I think, with that. That was part of his spiritual struggle. And he never come out and said it, but he alluded to the fact that it was still a struggle even though he was on death row. And he wrote back a few personal things he would write back to me would be like, one thing in particular, I remember he told me, this is strange, he told me at some point, you know, he liked dogs. I don't know that he'd ever been able to have one as a kid, but he liked dogs. And that seemed like he told, one of the pictures that he drew me one time, he drew after, and he sent to me, and I don't have that either. I wish I did. It was on 3 pieces that had to be taped together, and he had drawn it with a colored pencil, but it was kind of like a young girl, and I guess how he pictured my face in court, except that he drew it like with a different color hair and stuff. He didn't really identify it as me, but he drew that face of what he thought it looked like, and it was looking up into heaven, and then it seems like there was a rose somewhere drawn on it after that, and it was probably the picture that prompted it. But I had a dream, this is so weird, I had a dream that he was in my front yard of the house that I grew up in, and there was a dog out there with him, and I took him around to the side of the house because my mom and dad always grew rose bushes on that whole side, and I took him around there in the dream and showed him those roses, and that was all there was to it. There was nothing weird about it or anything else, but I always felt like that was just some kind of connection. Maybe God allowed me to dream that I had shared that with him because that was something that he wished he would have had when he was a child, you know. Things like that he would express to me, you know, I wish I could have grown up like that or in a Christian home. He did say things like that a few times. We just didn't really get into our thoughts and feelings or other than the Bible issues. I just wasn't going to allow him into my life that way. But I also wanted to be a real person to him, so I would tell him enough about myself that I was a sinner too, saved by the grace of Jesus Christ, that I shared enough that he knew I was serious. So, you know, I remember lots of things. Like, I remember things because I was detail-oriented that I didn't realize. Like, during the trial, I remember when they were presenting the evidence and they were talking about Mama having 10 gunshot wounds, but there was only 8 shots fired or such, and I already knew what it was, just instinctually, even at 20 years old, because I had replayed this whole incident in my mind continuously over and over and over of how it had to go down, feeling as she was falling down into the floor and scratching the speaker to get attention up to the owners in the house. You know, that was the grieving process for me as I went through every single what I thought she was thinking and feeling through the whole thing over and over and over, you know. So I remember during the trial, they talked about those, and everybody was like, in the family, several people were like, what? Why was there 10? And I remember just holding up my hands and saying, there's the other 2. He looked at me like I was crazy. Well, how'd you know that? And I said, well, I've just done this in my head so many times that that's what I assumed, you know. And sure enough, that was the truth. I remember things like that, and I followed enough of their whole trail, you know, through Texas, Florida, all the way back out into Kansas, and I've actually driven the I-70 corridor in Kansas since then, because we vacation out west and for about the past 7 summers, and we different way every time, and about, 2 or 3 years ago, I said I want to go this I-70 corridor at least once, because I want to see, you know, because to me that's the interesting part of the story of what I've read in the media as well. I don't know. One thing that surprised me at the time and impressed me was Camilla Carroll, the girl that was shot in Texas, came and testified during the penalty phase of the trial here in Arkansas with Daniel. Yeah, and I mean, she was shot several times, and I was expecting her to be wheeled in a wheelchair or something, and here she comes walking in. And so she had a pretty powerful testimony, you know what I'm saying, for the penalty phase, because they took her out in the woods and left her and said, okay, run, you can be free, and then unloaded on her. You know, so I remember that real distinctly. I'm pretty sure that's what makes the death penalty if it wasn't already on the table. I would love to talk to her. It really impacted the whole county, and I can go anywhere in the county now where my parents' age especially, and just a little bit younger, people between my parents' age and my age, and they all still think of it. And my sister, when they see my sister, it's like, there's Linda Marvin made over. She's built like Mama, and she looks like Mama, and has her mannerisms. Yeah. And I think that was a gift to her because she was so young. None of us have the same memories. My brother and my mama were the closest, I think, out of all of us. He and Mama had a special bond. I think some mamas and sons just do. That's where the hurt and the pain comes in for me. I remember, Mama was supposed to graduate from college the same year my brother graduated from high school in 87, and I barely got through that graduation, and he probably don't even realize it because I was standing there bawling because Mama couldn't be at his graduation. And that's the way I feel about my sister. She missed out. But at the time, you know, God always has a plan. And when we put our trust in God, He always takes care of us. My dad had just had his third back surgery about 2 months before Mama got killed, and they put him on disability, not going to be able to work anymore. So therefore, he had an income to take care of the kids. One of the things I remember Mama saying when I was growing up, and I don't remember when she said it, but it was after I was older and old enough to remember being a teenager to 20. She said, you know, Melanie, if anything ever happened to your daddy, I don't think I could make it. I just don't think I'd want to go on. And that was always a comfort to me because God knows it. He knew that Daddy could make it, you know. To me, He just said, Linda, come on. Your service is over. Come on home. David and the kids will be all right, you know. Our family has just had a heart for people that mess up and want to do better. That's just part of Mama coming through us because of Christ. Her Christ heart, you know, that's another star in her crown as far as I'm concerned.
Death rides the highway.